Thanks, folks. So right here is the application form. It's intechcenter.org/2020/10/fall 2020 conventional machining / in case you're looking for that address. Anyway, it's a huge opportunity, especially if people are looking for work or whatever. Because I got to tell you, they just redid the estimate of this quarter's growth, and it's 35% annually. It's the highest rate of economic growth in the history of the country, folks. So it's like, okay, so let's level up, right? Let's go to the next step in terms of our employment, right? If we're doing okay, let's do better. If we're doing good, let's do great. If we're doing bad, let's do good. Yeah, it's like, okay, so let's level up. Plus, this is all after work. Now, I got to tell you, sure, I mean, 5:30 to 9:30, that's going to be something. And I got to tell you, 7 to 3:30, that's going to be something. But what did Amy Coney Barrett say? Well, if life is hard, at least it's short. Yeah.
It's only for 3 months.
What?
It's only for 3-4 months or 3 months.
6 weeks?
Months.
No.
November to February?
Or November. Oh, yeah. So it's probably like 10 weeks, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Whatever it is, says approximately 24 hours of training will be conducted online, and the rest will be at Intech while practicing safe social distancing, which means they couldn't possibly have a lot of spaces. So it says right here that information sessions are capped at 20 candidates per session. Now, I got to tell you, nobody cares about working, so that's a big advantage for us, right? Because, oh, okay. So there's, which information would you like to attend? Thursday, October 15th from 4 to 5:30, or Tuesday, October 20th from 5 to 6:30. So anyways, conventional machining, that's a big deal, because if you can run CNC, Chuck, that's like, I mean, it would be very easy to run the transition from computer-aided drafting and computer-aided manufacturing to computer numerical control. It seems to me it'd be relatively easy to make the transition, and CNC people make bank. And if that's what you want to be able to do, I mean, that's a wonderful thing. So anyway, I wanted to make sure you were aware of this opportunity. In fact, the Intech Center is just packed full of opportunity, because they've got this grant, so they've got all kinds of money, and they can teach you how to be industrial electrician, all kinds of stuff, HVAC, all kinds of stuff. And it's either free or cheap. So something to think about. Intech, intechcenter.org. All right, so where are we at? Well, tell you what, we should have answered the DPF question. I realized that about 15 minutes after class. There we go. Let's see if there was a resolution to it. Lopez. Thanks for being here, folks. I'm always glad to see you. I have now run into a bigger second monitor. Once you get used to the 2 monitor setup, yes. Once you get used to the big 2 monitor setup, you can't go back to the, oh, here's my little 27-inch single monitor. Can't do it. So anyways, my point was, let's see, did we solve the DPF problem? The diesel particulate filter.
Well, we never got into that too much on that Audi.
Right, and I meant to, but it's like I completely forgot about it, and because I was trying to pound through the lesson. Yeah, so here's what we have to do. Let's see what we got. Get here. Wire T. Go to DPF region. Let's see. Yeah, let's go.
Hello there, and welcome to the third installment of OTR Performance's Tableside Chats. I'm your host, Jameson Kern, and in this video, we will be discussing forced regeneration. What is forced regeneration? Regeneration, or regen, of the DPF filter is the process that burns the soot accumulation that is inside the DPF filter. Educating yourself on what a forced regeneration is and how it works will...
Okay, DPF stands for diesel particulate filter. And that's because when you have a diesel motor, it's going to create a lot of soot, which is basically leftover carbonates, you know, the black stuff. And the big reason we don't have a lot of diesel motors in the United States is because we took a big stand against all the diesel particulates that come out of the exhaust on diesel motors. Well, we figured out a way to deal with those, get that soot out of the exhaust, and we use what's called a DPF filter, the diesel particulate filter. So here's the problem though, you can't run it forever without cleaning the filter. Now this filter cleaning process is usually undertaken as part of the car's regular operation. But if you don't run it in certain ways long enough, it's not going to regenerate on its own, in which case you will have to do the regeneration yourself. Now, here's the thing about the regeneration, right? Generation is to born, and regeneration is to rebirth. Basically, you're cleaning the filter out so you can use it some more. Problem is, if you leave this filter dirty long enough, it will start giving you power. It'll start cutting your power. For instance, it'll cut your power to like 50%, and then it'll cut your power to 30%. The actual software in the PCM will do this because overheat for one thing. So as a result, this needs to be done. It's not just a check engine light. It's not just a visual problem. It's a significant issue.
Will help you understand your after treatment system better. A forced regeneration.
Why do they call it after treatment? Because it's after the combustion process.
Is performed when a diagnostic scan tool starts the regeneration process. The forced regeneration overrides the soot accumulation or soot levels that are calculated in the ECM. The DPF soot load could be too high for a...
Okay, soot. That's basically that black kind of dry, kind of gunky stuff. And ECM is what they're calling the electronic control module. It's the same as the PCM.
Passive or active regeneration to occur, causing the condition where it is required to perform a forced regeneration. A forced regeneration is the highest level of the regeneration processes, and you will need a special diagnostic tool to start this process. If I replace a DPF differential pressure sensor or NOx sensor, do I need to perform a regeneration? Yes. Some trucks do require you to perform a forced regeneration before it will clear certain fault codes.
Now you say, why are they talking about trucks? Because you only have to do this on diesel motors. Yeah.
The reason for this is that the ECU wants to see that a forced regeneration is performed in order to clear the codes. Here's an example. Say you have a 2013 Volvo D13 with an SPN 4094 FMI1 SCR conversion efficiency low code being thrown at you. A forced regeneration is required to clear this fault code. The measurement of our ppm, or parts per million, between the inlet NOx 1 sensor and outlet NOx 2 are out of range and are causing this fault code.
Okay, so that's the same as the OBD2 requirement for the oxygen sensor before the catalytic converter and the oxygen sensor after the catalytic converter. The one in the back is just monitoring how good the process is since the last one.
It's recommended to check the EGR and NOx sensors to make sure the ppm is within the required specifications.
Now my question to you is this the kind of dummy stuff that we usually associate with working on trucks? Not really. I mean, this is using, scan tools. So as a result, I mean, yeah, you can probably teach it to someone who's not at the top of their game, but what we see is that in general, being an effective truck technician is going to be much more intellectually demanding than say it used to be back when we had, you know, mechanical fuel injection and you know, just regular old non-ABS brakes, for instance, and we didn't have all this after treatment. All right, tell you what, let us go back here. There's a lot of videos on this, so see what you got. It's different for different vehicles, so I want to be careful about showing a bunch of videos. Besides, we got a million things we got to do. Did the DPF problem get solved though? I mean, as you can see, it's got, you know, they're taking whole classes in this. If you have a scan tool that will do the regen, if you want to do this on your own, you have to have a scan tool that'll do it. That's the difficulty there. So, Joel, did you get your DPF problem solved? That was yours, right? Yeah, sorry, we forgot about it last night. All right, where are we at? Joel, you hear me?
Chapter 10.
Uh-oh. Huh. All right, chapter 10, we're talking about engine systems, yeah?
Yeah. It's actually lubricating system.
Okay. Well, let us talk about that. And they're asking us now what kind of personal protective equipment we want. And you know, the big issue, supposedly we got a Zoom call between all the auto teachers in the district. The big question is, how are we supposed to maintain 6 foot distance? Which is, this is getting so freaking dumb. It's getting so dumb, it's insane. So literally. So
it's not about the science, it's about the compliance now. You know, it's all about the
Looks
compliance.
like it.
yeah.
Control.
So the good thing about that is, I'm not going to tell you the good thing about this, but when we get together, I'll tell you. Yeah, there's actually a good thing about that. So today is 10/8/2020, and we got to talk about lubrication. And the reason we want to have lubrication is for, number one, reducing friction. And, you know, if you don't feel like changing your oil, that's cool, but you'll just wreck your engine. Because, well, for one thing, oil has lubricity, and it also has a whole bunch of other properties to it. And these are properties that get beat up as the oil gets beat up. And the oil gets beat up by
Heat.
wearing it out. Yeah, especially heat. Yeah, of course. Good. Yeah, especially heat. Yeah. But I got to tell you, not only is the oil going to lose its wonderful qualities, such as lubricity and resistance to breakdown, but also once the oil filter gets clogged, because it's got so much crap in it, it opens up what's called a bypass valve, and all your oil just starts circulating through your engine without it being filtered at all. That's going to be a problem, because what it's going to do is it's going to start circulating chips of metal throughout your oiling system, which is really going to tear up your engine. All right, so number one, we got to deal with lubricating friction. Number two, there's a significant cooling effect. Now, what's that cooling effect? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to take oil, which is going to be around the highest friction in the engine, generating all kinds of heat, and then we're going to take it, we're going to put it in the oil pan, where we're going to have a whole bunch of airflow going around it to cool it down. That's why oil pans are black, at least they should be. And that's also why they're out hanging in the breeze, at least they should be. So what we need to understand about this is the lubrication system is super, super important. I believe that last week we talked about the fact that like 30% of all the energy in the gasoline we burn is just turned into heat that we have to remove from the cooling system. Well, part of the cooling system has to be the lubrication system. So let us discuss that for a moment. Let's go like that. Yeah, that's good. Okay, that right there. There we go. This right there goes like that. I'm gonna give it a little 3D version. There you go. Okay. That right there is the oil pan. Okay. Now people think of the oil pan as just a reservoir, but it's really much more than that. It's also a vehicle by which we can reduce the temperature of the oil. Now, if you have like factory race car like the Z06 or something like that, you're actually going to have an oil cooler up front with air blowing through it all the time, trying to keep the oil cool, because the problem is it's designed to be raced, and racing really increases your oil temperature bad. In fact, there was a big problem with my generation of Z06s in that if you took them out and tracked them hard, they would overheat the oil. But most vehicles are not going to have that. Number one, because it's more expensive, but number two, and probably more critically, they take a lot more plumbing, and every plumbing fixture you have in the lubrication system is just asking for a leak or a failure. So the oil pan and the valve covers are both places where we will be removing heat from the oil, hopefully. So lubrication system's a big deal. Now, what's this thing right here?
The drain plug.
That's a drain plug, yep. And the drain plug is there to make it possible for us to drain the oil. Now let's answer the question. Do you drain the oil when it's hot or when it's cold? Well, if you drain it when it's hot, the oil is going to flow really, really well. But there's still going to be a bunch of oil stuck up in the top of the engine. But if you drain it when it's cold, you're not going to have the problem with all that oil stuck in the top of the engine, but it's not going to flow out very well. So you know what I do? I drain the oil when I feel like it, because what I've learned about life is if I feel like doing something, I better get out and do it right away before I change my mind, which I will. So, I mean, it's an imperfect solution. Now, if you have all day long, I suppose you could just like put it up and let the oil drain all day long, and you'd probably get it all out. But at least in a professional setting, you got a car that's coming in and you have no control over how hot or cold it is, and you just got to make production and get the thing out. All right, so here we have the drain plug. I want to make a beautiful drawing here. Please don't strip the drain. Well, please don't strip the hole that the drain plug goes in. That sucks. All right, so this goes like this. You got that right there. And then we're gonna have another one that goes like that. And then we got this right here. Draw what I draw, write what I write. And if I was you, I would make them the exact same size, because I'm making them this size for a reason. All right, so that right there is the drain plug. Now, this red thing right here is a gasket. Yep. Drain plug gasket. This is the first semester Jim Knott has not been in this class since I started teaching it like 17 years ago. So what does the drain plug gasket do?
Seals it, helps it seal.
It seals the drain plug, which is, I cannot overemphasize how important that job is, because that's at the bottom of the oil pan. And you got to realize that this oil pan is filled with oil, and you run out of oil, that's a freaking bad day. And it's one thing to run out of oil, that's true, but if you're a quart low of oil, that means all the heat removal that 4 quarts were supposed to do is now being done by 3, which means you're beating the hell out of the oil. Plus, you're not going to be able to remove as much heat because your oil's working all the time when it should be resting. So remember, you know, in a 4-cylinder engine or one of the small engines, typically you're only going to have 4 quarts of oil anyway. So if you run at a quart low, that's 25%, man. I mean, that could be a big issue. All right, so what's the drain plug made of? Well, a lot of them are made of rubber. I'm not a big fan of rubber as a material. Why? Because rubber has 2 enemies.
Heat
Yeah.
and oh shoot, dirt,
No, rubber.
moisture, water.
No.
Darn it, I can't remember.
Because rubber's enemies: heat and oil.
Oh yeah, duh.
Yeah. Okay, so the 2 enemies of rubber are heat and oil. Well, guess what the drain plug gets nothing but?
Heat and
Heat
oil.
and oil, yeah. So rubber, I've always felt, is an inferior material. I don't like it. I don't like using it. I don't trust it, especially around students who may or may not be super in tune to how tight you should make things. Because if you over tighten rubber, it will
Scatter.
it'll act like it's your friend, but then it'll let you down in the end. It carries a grudge. Okay, so what I like to use is nylon. Now, nylon is a type of plastic, and nylon tends to be very forgiving because it's relatively soft, especially compared to the steel or aluminum that the oil pan or that the oil pan might be made of. Oil pan is going to be made of aluminum or probably sheet metal, maybe steel reinforced where the drain plug itself goes. Drain plug itself is probably going to be made of steel. I like using nylon. In fact, they say that you're supposed to replace that gasket every time you change the oil. Nobody does. That's why I don't use that as my standard, but it would be good to change it, you know, it would be good to change it at least once, because what we see when we pull apart these cars is we see drain plug gaskets that have never been changed. And as a result, you see them with all kinds of splits and cracks, and you're like, ah. So how much does a drain plug gasket cost? Well, usually it's like $3 or $4 for 2. You know, it's well worth it. Yeah. Okay, so while we're on the topic of drain plugs, because this is an important topic, some things you need to know about drain plugs. They are available with magnetic tips. Now, why would you use them with magnetic tips? Because what happens is, see this it's got this little pill on the end, and it's magnetic. Because what it'll do is it'll pick up a bunch of, you know, iron filings. Like for instance, if you have steel cylinders, which you probably do, or if you have a cast iron block or a steel crankshaft or cast iron crankshaft, which you probably do, what's going to happen is that all of that ferrous material, which is defined as anything that contains iron, is going to stick to that tip of the magnetic drain plug, as opposed to being circulated throughout your engine if the filter doesn't catch it, or getting stuck and clogging your filter. So you can get these with magnetic tips. I don't think it's a necessity, but it's not a bad idea. And they are also available oversized. Now, see, here's the thing about that DPF regen. If we were in the shop, we could do that DPF regen really easy because we got all the scan tools and stuff to do it. Did I tell you I went back in the shop after it's been painted and they used a really light color, so every time you roll something, it leaves tracks?
Oh no.
Yeah. Hansel and Gretel would have loved it. So. Anyways.
Well, let's have to get a good mop.
Yeah. Yeah, and just you have one person work and the other person follow 6 feet behind, of course.
Yeah, of course.
I'll tell you the secret about that, but it's a good secret though. Oh, and I accidentally, yeah, never mind. I'm not going to tell you that secret, but it's the same secret I had from last Sunday. The point I was trying to make was, that's a good secret too. Also available oversized. Now, why would you want an oversized drain plug? Because what's oversized is these threads. Because what happens is a lot of people, they don't know what tight is and they want to work on their own cars and they're scared that this thing's going to come loose or it's not going to be tight enough, or they've got a bogus jacked up drain plug gasket and they figure, well, then I'm going to have to tighten it twice as much to get it to seal. There's a lesson in there for all of us. So they over tighten it. Well, that's a problem. So you can get drain plugs oversized, +1, +2, whatever. And what that's going to do is it's going to increase the size of the screw and its threads. So as a result, it's going to be tighter. And you aren't going to have to worry about stripping it because after all, you're good boys and girls. You're good technicians. You don't over tighten things, right? Hey, let me ask you, because we're here. You got that?
Yep.
Okay. Let me ask you, because we're here. 1/2-inch drive, 3/8 drive, 1/4-inch drive.
Mm-hmm.
These are 3 different sizes of ratchets. Okay. Why? Which are you going to use and why?
The 1/2-inch,
You're going to use a 1/2-inch drive?
I think.
1/2-inch drive is for tightening lug nuts. How
Oh,
tight
okay.
do you figure that drain plug's supposed to be?
I don't know.
About what? 30 psi maybe. I don't know.
30 maybe? I don't know. Well, you want to find out?
You use your hands, right?
Well, yeah, but there's a thing about using your hands, 2 or 1. And whether you're, depending on what your hand strength is, that could have a lot to do with it too. I'm going to come here. I'm going to come here. I'm going to come over here to Pro Demand. And I'm going to say log in. And I got that.
Can I ask you a question? Don't they have torque specifications for drain plugs? Or
Yeah,
no?
of course. That's what I'm looking at.
I thought so.
So let's just say 1998 Chevrolet Corvette. And I'm going to say use this vehicle. And then I'm going to say drain plug. Just shoot. Current drain, what the hell? Okay, so I guess I could use specifications. Doggone it. Let's try that. Okay, what's going on here? Specifications, fluids, capacities, component test, service manual. Come on, common specs. There we go. All right, so let's go here to engine cooling, engine mechanical, oil pressure. I've got a block in the way, so torque specifications right there. Fluid specifications, okay. Let's go to engines. Yeah, let's go to torque specifications. Cylinder head bolts.
Okay.
Oil. There you go. Okay, let's see. Oil skin power. Oh, that's not there. That's not there. Let's see. Oil pump to block bolt. Oil screen nuts. Oil pan. Okay, what am I seeing? It's not under drive. It's not under drain plug. Well, you know what it's probably going to be under is just go to change the oil. Let's close this out. Guess we go to oil change. Oil changing. Okay, real fix. It's going to be under specifications. Engine lubrication system. That's not what I want. Come on now. Real fixes. No, that's not going to be it. Cousins fixes. Parts and labor. Top repairs. Let us go back here to maintenance. Maintenance. No, right there. Come on now. Fluid capacities. Engine oil with filter, that would be 6.5 quarts. Doggone it. What am I missing, Chuck? I guess they're not putting it under drain plug. No, they're not.
How about just torque?
Yeah, I looked under torque, but maybe I looked under the wrong torque because torque specifications? Oh, that's for brakes. Sorry. I got this big picture in my way and it's kind of mechanical oil pressure, engine compression, engine specifications. Yeah, that might be it. Come on, make me happy. Connect the rod bearings, oil clearance. Doggone it. Nope. Well, see fluids under maintenance tab.
Turn that maybe. Fluids.
Can't just click that. That's just great. Where's maintenance tab? No.
How about just oil pan?
Yeah, unfortunately, I already been to oil pan, but let's try it.
Okay.
I already been to oil pan, and what gave me is the pan bolts. Panadria. Only specificaciones. All right, cheer me up. Yeah, see, it doesn't give it to me. Anyways, the M8 bolts are what, 18 foot-pounds, 25 Newton meters. Oil pump cover bolts. Yeah, this is inside. So 18, which is probably one hand with a 3/8, depending on how long it is. I would, Michelle, let me just put it this way. I would not suggest using a 1/2 inch unless you've got some kind of problems with hand strength. And if you do use a 1/2 inch, I would strongly suggest that you only use one hand, because a 1/2 inch you can generate some significant leverage with because it's so long. Plus, it's easy and beefy, and it doesn't hurt your hand very much. For instance, we wouldn't want to use a 1/4 inch drive on this because it would just hurt your hand too much, and it would be hard to generate enough force because it's got to be like 25 foot-pounds, something like that.
Yeah, he said 25 to 30 foot-pound.
I'm sorry?
25 to 30 foot-pound.
How'd you find it?
Yep.
How? Oh, well, you know what you could do is just look it up on the internet. Yeah.
I have mine. I know what mine is.
Okay, so 25 foot-pounds. Yeah, well, that's hitting it pretty hard with a 3/8. Just for me, being as big as I am and how strong I used to be, a 1/2 inch drive would be way too much for that. And you have a tendency to strip things because they're pretty fine threads.
Okay.
But using a 1/4 inch drive is too small. So now what we start to see is that we have to choose our tools in relationship to the job we want them to do. So let us move out of there. There we go. See, you know why he's smiling? Because somebody looked it up on the internet, so he didn't have to work so hard. The point I was trying to make was that, yeah, go back here. Huh, there we go. Okay, good. I got a new monitor set up, so now I'm kind of struggling with it because it's acting differently. And now I'm using 2 TVs instead of a monitor and a TV, so now it's acting differently. If only my good friend Chuck were here. That was a joke. So we start to see that our tool use is going to be, in a large sense, dependent on the kind of work we want it to do. Okay, so we want to change the drain plug gasket. If I had a car that a used car that I just bought, I would go down to the Stody-Doe and I would get myself the correct drain plug gasket. Now, some drain plugs have a O-ring embedded in them. I call those leakers because sure enough, if you get it hot enough, the rubber loses its elasticity and those things will be leaking all the time. According to me, if your drain plug is leaking, you need to take that as a serious issue, not just because you want to preserve the concrete, although that's cool too, not just because you want to preserve your driveway, but because I mean, it could get really bad really quick. And, you know, oil is one of those things that can grenade a motor in, you know, less than an hour. Yeah, so that's my theory about that. Now, while we're on this topic of drain plugs, you know, some cars come with plastic oil pans. Yeah, Infinity. Yeah, I'm looking at you. So one of the big problems that students have, let's say we've got a oil pan that looks like this. This is a front view. And you've got a drain plug that comes out, well, let's say like this. Not that, like this. Okay, so this is the front view. This is the oil pan, like this. And then the drain plug's on the side, right? So students think that when they take out this drain plug that the oil's going to go down, right?
It's out.
No, it goes out. And you need to be ready for that. Now, we have a little collection thing. We don't do this stuff on the ground. We just don't. Yeah, so if that's the way you want to do it, you're going to have to do it that way at home. We have an oil drain collection system, but it has a maximum capacity on it, folks. So one of the things you're going to have to check before you start draining your oil into it is you're going to have to make sure that it's not already full or pretty close to it, because if this thing overflows, it turns into a disaster. Now, the best part about it was that somebody filled, not only did they fill my oil barrel all the way to the top with oil, but then they filled a bunch of oil into my catch basin. And boy, did I hear about that. Because then all of a sudden it's this huge, huge issue to get the oil spill cleaned up. So don't be that guy. This has a capacity of, I think, 15 gallons. So if it gets full, let me know. We'll go ahead and drain it out and make more room for you. But we want to make sure that we just don't, you know, start over topping it. All right, please remember that the oil is going to come out this way. It doesn't go straight down. So be ready for it. Now, if this engine, you just drove it 60 miles and you drove it right on the rack and you started taking off this drain plug, number one, the drain plug is going to be hot and you aren't going to like it. But number two, that oil will burn you really, really badly.
Yeah, I don't want that.
Yeah, at Jiffy Lube they have this protective sleeve, because otherwise people are just getting cooked.
Yeah, it's not fun.
Yeah, yeah. Oh yeah, huh? So my point was that just be wary of the temperature of this oil and make steps to protect yourself. Also, you know, make steps to recognize that, you know, this stuff's going to be hot, it's going to be uncomfortable, and we need to make sure that we're ready for when this drain plug finally gets all the threads all the way out. I prefer to do it when it's a little cooler. I think if it's warm, that's sufficient for me. Well, either way, it's sufficient for me because I'm not going to do it anyway. But if it's warm, it's sufficient for me. One of the things we have to do in this class is we have to start thinking about scheduling in terms of what car is going to go on the lift first, because we can bang out an oil change in, I don't know, 15 minutes. So if we have a job that's lengthy or could or probably might lead to complications, we might want to bang out this oil change first. Now, this is not as big of an issue as it used to be, but if we get enough cars on the lifts, I can't always promise you 4 open lifts every night, because I've got 3 different classes, actually like 6 different classes using these facilities. But as soon as you guys get the red Corvette off the lift, it'll help you a great deal. Now, the same thing with automatic transmission fluid. Like I said, I think I said it last week, and I want to re-emphasize it. Always plan that every job is going to take twice as long as it should. Reason being is, if something goes wrong, it will take at least that long. But on a more positive note, I always plan that every job will take twice as long as it should. That way, when it takes the amount of time that it should take, I'm extraordinarily pleased and I'm extraordinarily grateful. Yeah, which is good. It's it's good to be happy. It feels like you won the lottery. Plus, what it does is it keeps me from overloading my system and over promising my facilities and resources. And this becomes a big issue, especially for the new students, because what the new students like to do is that, auto students love to stand around and talk about auto. But the simple fact of the matter is you've probably got 4 cars behind you that want to use that lift or the resources, whatever resources you're using. And if you're standing around with your car on the lift talking about nonsense, you're going to generate a bunch of resentment. Also, if you have a big job to do, like CV axles or McPherson struts, you might want to consider getting there early. Now, I'm going to have the ROP class from 2:15 to 5:45. Please do me a favor. Don't expect to show up at 6:45 and start a McPherson strut job. It's just not good karma. Because I got to tell you, especially if it's the first time you do it. Now, if it was Chuck coming in there, I'd say, yeah, we're probably okay. But if you are first timer or something like that, first time you do a job is always going to take 2 or 3 times as long as it should, even if you're a good wrench. So just be aware of that. Let's not get overly cocky. And please, oh, please, oh, please do not depend on me, Rudy, or Chuck to save you. I don't know the rest of the wrenches, but we'll find out, won't we? Please do not depend on these people to save you, because they probably got, problems of their own to work on. I mean, these are 3 generous people, but you can't expect them to sacrifice everything they want to accomplish for your sake, even though they probably will. So that's the thing about that. As I say, we want to work through this task list. Did you guys download it, print it out, whatever? Did you find?
May I get a little input in there, Ms. Roca?
Yes, sir.
From last year's class, it was great, but it seemed like nobody had their homework by knowing at least their torque specs and what tools will be needed right away. And that chewed up a lot of time.
Absolutely.
Even like Loctite. I mean, you need to have Loctite on a certain bolt and the torque specs. We need to have that ready, or you should know it ahead of time.
I got all that ready this year.
Absolutely. And let me reiterate something I said last week that I want to make sure people are clear on. If you're going to do the water pump on your 2004 Nissan Sentra 1.8 liter, I need you to watch the YouTube videos of how to do this job. Why? Because I'm not a general mechanic. Well, first of all, I've never been a general mechanic, but I certainly haven't been a professional mechanic for freaking years. As a result, I'm a teacher. I spend my time teaching. not in the shop banging out a bunch of cars. So I'm not going to instinctively know. This is not the kind of industry where you can instinctively know this stuff. Because it's not an easy job like being a doctor. Here it comes. Are you ready, Michelle? It's not an easy job like being a doctor where everybody has been the same for the last 4,000 years. No, this is different. Every year we have 70 different manufacturers, each putting out like 10 different cars. So each car is different. And as a result, you can't expect someone to have an instinctive understanding. Now, maybe if they were a professional technician and all they did was work on cars all day, every day for freaking 4 decades, they'd probably have a pretty good guess. But I'm saying, please don't depend on that. Yes, I got all kinds of certifications and degrees and blah, blah, blah. But the simple fact of the matter is, you'd be a lot better off just going to YouTube and getting at least a consensus on how to do this job. What do I mean consensus? Well, for instance, 2003 Honda Accord has rear drum brakes. There's probably 7 different videos on YouTube about how to do that brake job. And like I've warned you before, not everyone on YouTube is an expert. In fact, I've come to the conclusion, Chuck, that what I need to do is I need to steal people's content and just re-narrate it because the stuff they say is ludicrous. I mean, there's a lot of stuff they don't understand. That's the cost of not going to school. May I plug school for a moment? But not everybody who's on YouTube, that doesn't make them an expert. And a lot of times I'll see them do stuff and just like, oh my God, you're not really going to do that, right? So if you can find 5 videos on the kind of job you want to do, you're probably going to find that 4 of them agree, and then 1 of them is doing crazy stuff. Yeah, so if you just watch this video, you might make us all nervous. So please, please, please watch a YouTube video, take notes, whatever, write it down. Chuck is absolutely correct. Come prepared, because the simple fact of the matter is, if I've got 15, 20 students and they're all working on cars, and I got 4 lifts, so now I've got 4 projects plus a bunch of people using scan tools outside. I'm not going to have a ton of time to hold any hands that don't need to be held. Now, if you need guidance, if you need close personal attention, whatever you need, we will provide whatever you need, but it's important to need as little as possible. Let me just put it that way, right?
Mhm.
Let me just put it that way. So do us all a favor and prepare as well as you can, because as Chuck said, a lot of times, we've been finding that people get halfway through a project and then they're like, oh yeah, I need this thing. Do you happen to have that? And I'm like, no, I don't. And then it's like, okay, so where can we find a parts store that has this, in the next 30 minutes? Because the big problem, okay, next part 2. Folks, when your car's on the lift and you go out to get parts, do me a solid and don't go to freaking Taco Bell on the way home, on the way back. Yeah.
Wait till you go home.
Yeah, wait till you go home, whatever, because I got to tell you, people are like, well, okay, so this job should take 30 minutes, so I'm going to budget 30 minutes. No, do the Roqueliff approach. This job should take 30 minutes, so budget an hour and a half. That way, when you get done 45 minutes early, you'll be so happy, and I'll be so happy, and Chuck will be so happy. And the good thing is, then you can stand around and relax, and then you can talk. Then if you're really hungry, you can go to Taco Bell or whatever, but do me a solid. Don't go to the freaking store and get drinks or freaking pizza or whatever. Okay, pizza can be next week, right? Drinks can be next week. The important thing is that we get this job done, because I got to tell you, Thursday is my long day. It's 13 hours straight. And if I'm working 13 hours straight and you make me stay over 45 minutes late, I mean, I'm a nice guy usually, but even the nicest guy, anyway, I'm just saying.
Yeah,
I'm
get
just
it.
saying. I think words of the wise, right? So
Makes
my point
sense.
was, yeah. I mean, we'll do whatever we can, but try to make it as little as possible, because after all, what I tend to see is that the students who are experts or / highly skilled tend to get sucked into a whole bunch of other students, like side projects, and they don't get what they came done just because they're nice about it. So anyways,
I got one more story.
Yes.
Let's see. I think the first semester we were doing a brake inspection on a young man's car, and I think we put the brake pads in the front and looked at the back, but we were getting the car down and getting it buttoned up, and I asked the young man, I said, hey, you checked the torque on all the wheels? And he goes, oh, I checked this one, the front ones, because I was working on it, but the other guys were looking at the back. And I said, well, you don't know if they actually torqued them, did you? So sure enough, when he went to check the torque all the way around, they were loose. So just because your buddy's next to you working on the car, because everybody kind of jumps on the project,
Yeah.
you know, you can't count on them actually torquing it. It's not their car. It's your car. You make sure that if them wheels come off, you make sure they're torqued, because I've seen them loose, you know. So that's all. That's my opinion. That's all.
Yeah, absolutely. And when it comes to caliper bolts or anything like that, be as anal as you possibly can be, right? I'd be checking that stuff 2 or 3 times. Just be OCD, because the simple fact of the matter is checking everything 3 times is way better than missing something once. And Chuck's exactly correct. One of the big problems we have is that, you know, people tend to get excited, which is cool. And when you take the wheels off, then everybody wants to take a wheel. But the simple fact of the matter is one person needs to be responsible for checking all the fasteners, one person. And if that's the driver, that should be you, right? And I mean, the more you assume, especially since, you know, we're dealing with a bunch of nuevecitos. I mean, you can't assume that these people are going to know every step in the process. In fact, you should probably assume that they don't. So just out of, I mean, even if it's not your car, do yourself a favor, grab a torque wrench, look up the torque spec, because I've already told you where to look for the torque specs, right? And
With the man.
yeah, well, no, the torque specs, just go to Discount Tire Centers. That's the easy way for the lug nuts. And well, yeah, pro demand for like the calipers and stuff like that for sure. But what I'm saying is just do yourself a favor, just for fun, and go around and do all the wheels just for fun, right? How long is it going to take you? 5 minutes? And you'll be happy all the days of your life, because you won't be waking up at midnight going, oh my God, what if it's not, right? So how do you torque the wheel? Well, we know it's in star pattern, but I'm always going to do it twice, because I'm used to working on these wheels that have 8 or 10 lug nuts. It's very easy to miss one. And if you do this 500 times, once or twice, you're going to find a lug nut that you had missed. I'm just saying, that's personal experience. So you're going to do it in a star pattern for sure. But I'm going to go around, once I've gone around once and I've tightened every lug nut, I'm going to go around twice just to make sure. I learned this the hard way from being a professional mechanic. While you're standing there, it's going to take 15 seconds to check all the lug nuts twice. But the level of satisfaction and peace of mind that it's going to bring you is insanely worth it. And if it costs you a minute out of your life, it's going to be the best return on investment you've ever had for a minute. Yeah. So yeah, Chuck's absolutely correct. You got to watch out for stuff like that, because you're going to see people that are going to bring the wheels down snug and then they're going to get distracted. Well, so get used to using a torque wrench, right? I mean, we could all use more practice on the torque wrench. See, what we want to do is when we find ourselves talking nonsense about the kind of car we wish we had, or the kind of car we drove once, or bloop, blop, bleep, blop, the car we saw on the road, bloop, blop, bleep, blop, we start losing track. And we got to respect the process. What we're doing is extraordinarily important and potentially very hazardous, right? We have never, ever had we have never had a comeback in my class. And that's because I tend to be very fastidious about stuff like this. But, you know, as we get more and more lifts, please don't depend on me for, boy, listen to this. I should be a politician. Please don't depend on me to do my job. No, please don't depend on me to ensure the tightness and appropriateness of every fastener, because that puts a lot of pressure on me that shouldn't be on me, because after all, we're supposed to be training technicians, by which I mean to say it's supposed to be on you.
Yeah.
Now you say, well, I'm not supposed to be a technician. Well, technically, then we're not supposed to be funding your training, because you have to understand, you're paying what, $1.10 an hour? Well, between all of you, you're paying probably, oh, should I say this? You're probably be paying like a quarter of my salary. So this is taxpayer money, which means that they're investing in you guys in hopes that you'll get a better job, or that you'll get a job that you don't have now. So we got to take the vocational attitude towards the kind of stuff we're doing, at least. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyways, it's cool. It's cool. We'll gain the skills that are going to make us not only more employable, but they're also going to make us better at whatever we choose to pursue. Now, what's going to happen here is when I take off that oil filter, what's going to happen? It's going to dump oil too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, there are a variety of tools to take off the oil filters. Now, there's special tools for like the Toyotas and all kinds of stuff that has weird oil filters. But there are things that look like this. That's not the worst job I ever did. That's oil filter wrench. I don't much like it.
Need a lot of room for those things.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the accessibility is often a huge challenge in that. What I do like is the kind that goes like this, and then it comes down with a lip there, comes down like this, and then it's got this little, and it's got a lip here, and then it comes like this. So it's like conformed to the shape of the oil filter.
Uh-huh.
And then it connects to a ratchet. Yeah.
I have 2 of those.
But you have to have different sizes of these.
Right.
Now, if you have a Toyota and it takes that special oil filter wrench, do yourself a favor, go on Amazon, whatever, and just buy it. Yeah. That way you'll always be happy, and you won't be tempted to use a vice grips or something like that, which would be freaking awful. So don't do that. Now, it's going to dump oil when you take this off, so you need to make sure you're ready for that, and also that this drain pan is ready for that. In fact, you know, a lot of people are going to say, well, you know, I want to drain the oil and I also want to take the oil filter off. Well, there you go. See? Siempre el rey de los reinos. There you go. Perfect.
That's a Toyota.
Yep. Now, a lot of people, they want to take off the oil filter at the same time they take off the drain plug. Problem is, you get 2 oil drips, and how much of that oil do you want to get out? As much as possible, basically. Now, you are going to be leaving some oil in the system, that's for sure, because, yeah, you're going to be leaving a bunch of oil in the system. So basically, it's going to get diluted. The clean oil is going to get diluted with the dirty stuff, but hopefully as little as possible, right? All right, so we've got these different oil filter wrenches. Remember, oil filter wrenches are used to remove filters.
Right.
My internet connection is unstable. Really? Yeah, I swear it. I've been so disappointed since I changed carriers. Anyways, my point was that these are used to remove filters. You better understand which way is tighten and which way is loosen. And you better hope that the person before you didn't over tighten this filter. So what are we going to do? We're going to use these to remove the filters. Be careful when you're removing the filters, because we need to make sure this thing comes off. And, you know, there's horror stories, I mean, where you have to get a big old chisel and poke a big hole in the oil filter and, you know, kind of pull it off. That's what happens when people over tighten them. So let us go to page number 2. And folks, I am going to primarily focus, I think, tonight on actual service of the lubrication system as opposed to operation of the lubrication system, because I've been thinking a lot lately about how to run this class in lecture mode. And, you know, I could spend all night on a lubrication system. You know, we don't have that luxury. So anyways, let's talk about what an oil filter
An
is.
electrode still? Mr. Roquefort?
Oh, the principal actually asked me to call him tonight because we haven't got electude yet. And in fact, there is reluctance to get the electude. You know how much the electude is? It's freaking insanely expensive. Sorry, electude.
Man, that's a good program, though.
Yeah, and they won't let us get it for 6 months. I mean, they won't let us get it for 1 semester. So as a result, if we come back from distance learning in January or in November, but mostly in January, if we come back from distance learning, I mean, the money we would spend on that program is more than I've spent from Chaffee Adult School since I started working there. So, you know, let's see, P3810, let's call it, for instance. All right, so that's the big problem there. It's a wonderful, wonderful program, but, you know, unless the students are using it like crazy, and unless you're charging a lot for tuition, it's hard to, I mean, basically what happens is if they have to pay for a program like that, then what they're going to have to do is take money from things like literacy programs and stuff like that, which is going to be a pretty hard sell. All right, so that right there is an oil filter, and what I wanted to do, although I'll probably regret it, there you go. That's an oil seal. Yeah, it worked out pretty well, didn't it? Yeah, it worked out good on the next page too.
Looks like a Fram.
Yeah, that is a oil seal. Now, on a scale of 1 to 10, how important is that seal?
10.
About a 10.
About 50,000. Yeah, that's a big deal. So we need to do everything we can to make sure that that seal is treated properly. And there's a lot to know. First of all, when you take off the old filter, make sure that oil seal isn't still stuck to the boss where the oil filter attaches, because that happens frequently. And when that happens, it's a big problem, because when you put a seal on top of a seal, how much pressure is that seal going to seal? How much pressure? Full oil pressure, which means it could be, I mean, I've got like 85 PSI on the Z06 in the morning. I got like 85 PSI, pounds per square inch. That's crazy. That's a lot. And that seal has to be able to hold it. So it's crucial that this seal gets installed correctly and treated well. Now, how do you do that? Well, first of all, when you take off the old filter, you make sure that this thing came with it.
Yeah.
Part 2. You're going to read on the side of the oil filter, it's going to say 3/4 to 1 turn
Auto seal.
past contact. Hey, you going to put some oil on that seal just to lubricate it before you put it up there?
Yes.
A little bit. Some people use dirty oil, but I don't. It's like, you know, I'm going to put some oil in here before I put it on anyway. So I'm going to use clean oil just because, you know, pour it out for the homies. I don't know, but I'm going to use clean oil. And I'm going to fill this oil filter up with as much oil as I possibly can without dumping it when I install it. We'll talk about that in a moment. But I'm going to put a little fingerful of oil around this seal to make sure that it doesn't get, you know, stuck. have friction issues. Now you're going to see on the side of the oil filter, it's going to say 3/4 to 1 turn past contact. What does that mean? Once the seal makes contact, 3/4 to 1 turn after that. Now you may want to come in here like this, like here's the bottom of the filter. You may want to come in here with a big black marker and mark it like this so that you can spin it 3/4 of a turn and 1 turn and you know where it ends up. Because this is critical. We need to make sure that it's 3/4 to 1 turn past the point where the seal makes contact with the engine block. That's it, not more, not less. We've seen in this very shop, in this very class, we've seen oil filters that were loose, that were dumping oil, and you could use, you know, these 2 fingers to take the oil filter off. Insanely lucky didn't blow an engine. We've also seen stuff where you had to drive a freaking big old punch or screwdriver through the oil filter to get it off because it was over tightened. Okay, so 3/4 to 1 turn, that's it. More is not better and less is not better. It's exactly here because that's going to give you the exact correct crush on this seal so that it doesn't split or deform inappropriately and that it's tight enough. Okay, so lots of people like to put a mark like this on the bottom of the oil filter because it makes it easy to tell if you've gone 3/4 of a turn or 1 turn or someplace in between. What a lot of people also like to do with a smaller Sharpie than this one is they like to put, I don't know, 10, 20, signifying the date so they know when the last time the oil was changed. Yeah, idea. I'm down with that. Okay. Hey, what's P3810?
P3810?
What is that? It's a part number, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Now, you will find that for the exact same vehicle, you're going to see some oil filters that look like this and some oil filters that look like this. What's that about? Well, I can pretty much guarantee you this one's going to be more expensive. Now, how often do you change your oil? Well, it depends what's up with your car. But as for me, I'm going to use synthetic oil all the time, guaranteed. And if I'm not using synthetic oil now, I'm going to make a transition away from old school oil because a number of times I've seen synthetic oil just insane performance. Twice I've seen an engine started with no oil at all, and the fact that it had synthetic oil, it didn't even make noise. Which, so, I'm going to use synthetic oil, which means my oil change intervals are going to be immense. 7,500, 10,000 miles. In fact, they're talking now about some synthetic oil that's going to go like 20,000 miles between oil changes.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't know about that, but what I do know is look at the difference in oil filters that the parts person is offering you. And you're often going to see that for another $5, you can get an oil filter that's probably got twice the performance. Now, are we talking about masks or are we talking about oil filters? You don't know. Watch. You got that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Here's a screen like this. Well, this screen is only going to catch particles of a certain size, right? So you wouldn't want to try to stop mosquitoes with a chain link fence, right? That would be crazy. In fact, if you required everybody in the whole state to try to do that, that would be crazy talk. So my point was that this is the same issue with oil filters. If you get the cheapest oil filter, they tend to have big old holes like this, which means little stuff is going to go straight through it. Like viruses through a cloth mask. So the point I was trying to make was better oil filters are going to have smaller spaces. As a result, they're going to catch smaller particles and they aren't going to circulate them through your engine. Well, how much does it matter to you? I think it's worth it. I think for an extra $5, $10 to get the top quality oil filter, especially since you're going to be running it so long with these synthetic oils, I think it's well worth, you know, adding the extra $5 or $10. After all, how long is it going to last? A year? So what is that? 50 cents a month? I think we can hack the 50 cents a month.
It's worth it, huh?
Yeah. Now, one thing you do have to watch out for is don't leave these oil filters on too long, because the problem with the small screen is it's going to catch everything, which means it's going to clog up earlier. And remember, like I said, the lubrication system has a bypass valve to compensate for the fact that sometimes people leave their oil filters on too long and they become clogged, and that would negatively affect your oil pressure going to your crankshaft, your connecting rods, your valve train, all that. So what they do is when filter gets clogged, they quit using the filter. The bypass valve opens and oil is not filtered. Now that's bad. That's really bad. And if you think you're getting over by saving $3 by not changing your oil, or $30 or whatever, I can guarantee you're going to pay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Plus, anytime you leave oil in there that long, it's going to tend to create sludge, which is going to take a lubrication passage that was this big and make it this big. What's that going to do to your lubrication?
Make it
Gonna
not as
cut
effective. Yeah.
It's going to cut down the volume of your lubrication, which is a bad idea. I mean, it's like the veins going to your heart being this big, and then you eat too many chicharrones and now it's this big, right? It's like, that's why they put stents in, to restore the flow. Yeah. It's how people have heart attacks. In fact, that's not how they have strokes, but it might be related.
Yeah, sometimes.
Yeah. So let's not do that.
No.
All right, so when the filter gets clogged, the bypass valve opens and the oil is not filtered. So we need to make sure that the filter doesn't get clogged. But let's use a good quality filter. In fact, I've been told that certain filters cannot be used with synthetic oil.
Really?
Yeah. So ask your parts person that. That's why I would. Well, I got to tell you, one of the reasons that I like to go to the CarQuest place is that those guys know a lot more about cars. So as a result, they can give you advice and counsel that, you know, people that just started 2 weeks ago can't really give you. Or, you know, they might just be telling you rumors they hear outside behind the schoolyard, right? You know how that works. So get a good quality filter. Now, here's the thing about oil. Buy it on sale. Yeah, buy it on sale. Do yourself a favor and start getting in the habit of buying stuff on sale. They end up, you know, the money you save, you can buy more stuff on sale. But almost every place is going to have a deal put together where they'll sell you the oil plus a filter, plus like maybe a drain pan and a roll of blue towels, something like that, maybe a funnel, I don't know, whatever. But they're all going to have these package deals, and I would strongly suggest you get in the package deals. As I say, I would strongly suggest running 100% synthetic. I've seen it solve so many problems, and I've seen it perform in ways that are completely amazing to an old cat like me that's used to the regular oils. Now, can you go directly to synthetic oil from wherever you are now? No, because what they have is they have regular oil, and then they have full synthetic, and then they have synthetic blend in the middle. Okay. So here's the thing. If you're running regular old organic oil, cool. But in order to make the transition to full synthetic, you need to run synthetic blend first. So when you change your oil, go to synthetic blend, and the next time you change your oil, you can go to straight synthetic. But I'm telling you, the mileage that we're getting out of full synthetic is awesome, because the early cars that had the maintenance required light, where you were expected to, change your oil every 3,000 or 4,000 miles, or even 5,000 miles, now they've kicked that way out. For instance, I used to get that alarm all the time on the Corvettes, and it's like, okay, so what's the point? I've only got 5,000 miles on this synthetic oil, so I can turn out the maintenance reminder light and maybe even go another round. If I'm not doing a bunch of hard driving, let the clock go around another time. How you feel about that, Chuck?
I don't.
Yeah.
I don't. I change every 5,000.
With synthetic?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if we were all millionaires, we'd do it that way too, Chuck.
Ain't nothing too good for baby.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing is, once you get used to this concept in mechanics of not wanting to be stranded on the side of the road, for instance, if you're up in the North Slope of Alaska, I'm going to be going the extra mile to make sure that everything is done as good as humanly possible. There are certain accommodations we can make because we're in Southern California and the weather's so nice all the time. It doesn't really beat stuff up the way it does in other applications. But I would run the full synthetic. If you're not running synthetic yet, I would start running it as soon as you can. You should be able to tighten this oil filter by hand. I can't imagine you not being able to tighten this oil filter by hand. And I got one more thing I want to talk to you about before we go on break. Man, time flies in this class. Some oil filters go like this, mount like this. Some oil filters mount like this. And some oil filters mount like this. Okay, here's the thing. Put as much oil as you can in filter before installation. Why?
When you start the car, then it'll be covered. It'll
Yeah.
have the right lubrication.
If your filter is empty, your oil pump is going to have to fill up the filter before it starts pushing oil to your crankshaft or your connecting rods or anything else, which is bad. Running dry is bad. Now, synthetic will protect you a lot better, but it's still bad. So we want to put oil, as much oil as we can, into the filter before we install it. Now, here's the thing. If the filter goes in this way, you can only probably put half, maybe a third, maybe a quarter of oil. What I would do is I would get in there and I would swirl the oil around like this to make sure all the paper was saturated, because that's what tends to take a long time. You can put more in here. If I'm putting in an oil filter that goes up like this, I'm going to fill it as far as I can, because this oil thing is a big issue. You don't want to be messed around. Now, 3/4 to 1 turn, done and done. Maybe you want to get up there before you put the filter on. You want to wipe the surface that it's going to connect to. Not the worst idea you ever had. On this drain plug issue, do me a favor. The first couple of times you do it, have someone who's a veterano, a serious veterano, not just someone who has been in the class 3 weeks longer than you have. Have a serious veterano check your drain plug to make sure it's tight, because that's not the kind of stuff you want to be worried about. Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, it is currently 7:32, so are we going to do what, 7:45?
Yes.
Okay.
All right, folks, appreciate it.
Mhm.
See you in one moment.
Yes.
Miss Rookcliffe,
Kitty.
Yeah.
No kitty.
got my new part in.
Oh, good. I'm so sorry about that. You never found the old one?
Nope. Never found it.
Well, yeah. Well, you'll probably find it tomorrow then.
I'll find it a year or two from now when I'm doing something else.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, and then you'll have to buy another car because after all, you don't want to have an extra part. All right, turn off recording. Thanks, folks.
I was going to tell you.
Thanks, guys. All right. So
Sorry.
for our level of operation, I don't think there's any significant difference between any name brand. In fact, I would almost suggest getting the house brands because God knows O'Reilly doesn't own their own refinery, for instance.
Right.
If you ask them, they'll tell you who makes their oil. But I'm just going to use synthetic, and I'm going to go for a package deal if I can get it, which I almost always can. Something's always on sale. So my point was that types of oil, I'm not overly convinced. Now, viscosity is an issue. Viscosity looks like this. Viscosity is resistance to flow. Okay, resistance to flow. So it's like molasses. It kind of flows slowly. Now, it used to be back in the day when I was your age that we used to think that the higher the viscosity, the better, because that's what would allow us to fill up the clearances between parts with oil so that parts didn't touch each other, because if the parts touch each other, they're probably going to smear some metal off. All right, so this is a side view. Let me just show you like this. Well, here's a flat bearing, looks like this. Here's the other side of the flat bearing, looks like this. And then here, okay, there we go. Let's go ahead and put a bolt head right there, put a bolt head right here. Put a rod nut right there, little thing sticking out. Just for instance, we'll call this, you know, a rod journal. Okay, so the red part, the red part is the bearings. This blue part is called the rod journal, which is part of the crankshaft. But in between the bearings and the rod journal is this little space right here. And that's the space that makes all the difference. Because that space right there is called clearance. And the clearance is where the oil lives. Now, as I say, back in the day, we used to believe that higher viscosity was better because what it was going to do is it was going to fill up that space. It was going to make sure that space got filled up. So as a result, we wouldn't have the rod journal touching the bearings, for instance. And in an engine that's been well maintained, it's stunning to see an engine with 200,000 miles on it that looks almost brand new on the journal and on the bearing. It's stunning to see. It's like, man, how does this happen? Well, change your oil regularly, right? Don't beat the crap out of the engine. Incidentally, did I tell you that if you let your idiot 18-year-old nephew borrow your car for Friday night, he can put 50,000 miles worth of wear on your engine in 2 hours. Easy.
Wow.
Huge mistake, colossal mistake. Just so you know. you know, it's like, do you really want to put it at risk? You know, the red Corvette, I let a student borrow it, and it took less than 3 hours for it to get freaking destroyed. So the point is, yeah, we're still putting it back together. The point I was trying to make was that that clearance needs to be filled with oil, and our philosophy was to go thick because we figured that's what's going to fill up the gap. Turns out that philosophy was wrong. And the reason it was wrong is because thicker oil, higher viscosity oil, doesn't flow as fast. It doesn't flow as well. As a result, when this doesn't have oil between these two, it takes a long time for thicker viscosity oils to reach that point. As a result, it runs without lubrication. And as a result, it is going to damage, well, put it this way, the bearings have a soft surface on them so that they don't score the crank. But it's going to cause metal-to-metal contact, and that's bad. So the manufacturers have flipped on this, and they want to run tighter clearances here that the thicker oil will not flow through adequately or appropriately. So how are we running tighter clearances? Well, we're better at machining now than we used to be, right? Now we don't have some guy named Fred out there with a lathe cutting these. Now it's all done with, you know, computer numerical control. As a result, we can get much tighter clearances in our journal to bearing relationship. Now, we used to go for super high viscosity oils, but now they're making stuff that's zero weight, which is to say it's got the same viscosity as water. We never would have dreamed of using that in a million years. In fact, we would have laughed and shook in terror if someone had told us we were going to use oil that had the same viscosity as water. That would have been ludicrous at the time. But what the manufacturer's thinking is first of all, it's synthetic, so you get a good coating on the parts anyway. But what the manufacturers are thinking is that this will travel way faster through the lubrication system because it's so much easier to pump. Now, you realize that, for instance, the oil that comes off the North Slope of Alaska is so thick that they have to put thinners into it just so they can pump it through the pipeline. Then they have to take the thinners out of it when it gets to the refinery. My dad used to work North Slope of Alaska. He said what the mooses used to do is they would go and they would lean on the pipeline because it was warm. They had to warm the oil in order to get it to move. That's the winter part of this equation. Oil gets thicker as it gets cold. He also said the welders up there would be straddling a 4-foot pipe like this, and they would be welding like this, and then they'd put the stick in their other hand and they'd be welding it like this, and it would all pass inspection. The pipeline welders are the best welders in the world, right?
Yes.
That's nice. Well, I mean, yeah, but the problem is, you know, you go up there and a bottle of Jack Daniels is $150. I mean, you're making a lot of money, but the question is, you're going to be able to take any home?
Yeah, right.
That stupid cat won't catch her rats.
No, she's afraid of them.
You need to take her down to the pound and show her.
They mess with her though. They like try to bite her and stuff. I still have them. They're mice though. They're not rats.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm thankful.
Makes it a little bit less yucky.
If you could
But
paint
not
it black,
much.
if you could paint it black and put a white stripe on them, I know exactly who I'd send. That was a joke. Yeah. The skunk terrorist. So anyways, what we're seeing now, especially with the smaller engines that we're using in hybrids, is we're seeing these insanely low viscosity numbers. And I'm just going to say again, we need to make sure that we change our oil, change our filter. Now, some people are saying change the filter every other time. Man, I don't know.
Can you do it with every oil change?
Yeah, that's standard practice. Here's what I do, and I think it's a good practice. Here's what I do. I think we have to put ourselves in a financial situation where $5 or $10 isn't making our decisions for us.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, if I'm gonna go to all the trouble of getting the car on a rack and draining the oil, draining the filter is so easy and so quick. Why not do both at the same time, just for fun, you know?
Yeah.
But yeah, this has been a revolution in terms of how people think about, how the manufacturers think about viscosity. Now, as the engine gets older, this is what we used to think. As the engine gets older, which it used to do much more quickly, because after all, there was some dude named Fred, you know, doing the machining on the crank, and sometimes he'd get it, you know, fat, and sometimes you'd get it thin, which was a significant problem for American manufacturers. In fact, that's why American engines used to die about 100,000 miles, and you know, these Asian engines were coming out at like 200, 300, and people started noticing, wow, these engines are a lot better, because they had much tighter control in terms of their tolerances. But as the engine gets older, this clearance is going to increase. Why is it going to increase? Well, simply because of wear. Now, when does wear happen? Wear happens, first of all, when you're working it hard, but primarily starting and stopping. What is it? 95%? 95% of all engine wear occurs when starting and stopping. And we got to ask ourselves why. Well, the reason is because when we first start the engine in the morning, what's the oil pressure?
0.
0. And not only that, but there's no oil between the parts. Now, there is the film that synthetic oil provides, which is why I use synthetic oil, but there's no oil pressure anywhere. When you first start the engine, yeah, it's got to build up oil pressure. And the biggest problem you're going to have about that is that, you know, it doesn't automatically click to 40 or 60 PSI. It's a positive displacement pump, which means the pressure it puts out is going to be proportional to how fast it's turning. Now, it does have a relief valve on it, so it's, you know, it's only going to go so high. But for the most part, on a positive displacement pump, the amount of pressure it puts out and the amount of volume it puts out is going to be proportional to how fast it's turning, like a water pump, for instance, or a fuel pump. Well, any pump, really. So as a result, when you're cranking the engine and it's cranking slow, it's not putting out that much volume and it's not putting out that much pressure. As a result, this bearing and that journal might be kissing each other, and it might be kissing each other pretty hard. Remember, when we are in regular engine operation, that film of oil is between the bearing and the journal, and those two never touch. A lot of people don't realize that, but those two never touch as long as there's oil pressure. So, as a result, you start to see the beginning of these start-stop systems on vehicles where you come to a stoplight and the thing shuts down. And then as soon as you step on the pedal, it starts up again. Well, this thicker oil was not appropriate for that kind of living. That's why we went to this thinner oil, so that the moment the engine starts, you're going to have tons of oil pressure because this stuff flows so freely.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So this is the new generation. Crazy stuff's happening with oil. Really crazy stuff's happening with cars. It's an exciting time to be in the industry. I mean, it's, when you look at the changes between 1950 and 1960 or 1970, you're like, well, that's interesting, but what's going on now in terms of software and in terms of hardware is just crazy. Incidentally, Chuck Reyna, do you need some flat screen TVs? Because I got like 5 of them in my freaking living room. Do you have a use for them? It's crazy. Dude just dropped off another one when I was, you know, I went out to my front porch and there was like sitting there. I was like, oh, okay. Okay, so 95% of all engine wear occurs when starting and stopping. Okay, so I'm going down Pomona Way or Upland, I guess, like 6th Street, 8th Street and Upland. And, they have those trains. Okay, so when I come to the clanging bell and the little gates come down, should I turn off my car? Well, if you like engine wear, that's a good way to get it. Especially on a short train, like a commuter passenger train, something like that. But on a longer freight train, should you shut off your engine? I don't think so. And the reason I don't think so is because, starters are expensive and engines are expensive. Now, how much gas is it going to cost you to sit there idling, waiting for the train to go by? 15 cents, 25 cents?
Yeah.
Versus turning off the engine and going through all that engine wear and having to run the starter, which, works fine until it doesn't.
Yeah.
So, people say, well, I'm concerned about fuel economy. I don't think it's going to change your fuel economy in any noticeable way. And then they say, well, I'm worried about the, environment. It's like, yeah, well, if you're worried about the environment, quit saying mean things. So, yeah. If you're worried about the environment, turn down that damn radio. That was a joke. So, Michelle, have you heard that album yet?
No, I'm dying to hear it though.
I
heard it was great.
Is it out on the market?
I'm not sure. I don't think so.
Man. Okay, so anyway, my point was, it used to be that when we got these clearances bigger, that we would get a thicker oil. Sometimes on more beat up, like old trucks, people will go to a thicker oil. I think a lot of it is just superstition. If it makes you feel better, sleep better at night, maybe you could get, thicker oil, whatever. They do have high mileage, actually, oil brands made for high mileage. Like I said, I think what we really need to do is we need to get out of the habit of having $10 make our decisions for us, right? Let's go ahead and buy the right thing and not have to worry about that $10. Well, okay, in order to do that, we have to increase our hourly wage. Okay, well, now's the time to do that, right? In fact, the last 6 months was a great time to do that because everyone else was sitting around feeling sorry for themselves, spending that stimulus check. And, if you were in school, you were making progress to where now that the economy is blowing up, now you can really make your move, because I got to tell you, me as an employer, if you've been sitting around on unemployment for 6 months, on fun employment for 6 months, I'm going to have some serious questions about how dedicated you are to the world of work. I just found out though last week it's like $300 a week. No wonder what happened to my hair? Well, that's what, it's got. Yeah, so they're paying like 35, 38 grand a year to be unemployed.
It's crazy.
Yeah, I know someone who's pissed because she works in the freaking prison, and that's about how much she makes for working in the prison.
Yeah.
Yeah, so anyways, on a happier note, that's my theory about oil. Now, how do you know what oil to use? Well, look it up on ProDemand. I would try to look for other sources than some dude that works at one of these, civilian auto parts stores, because he's probably going to sell you whatever he's told to sell you. I don't mess around too much with viscosity. Let's talk about service grades. Well, there's SF, SG, SL, SK, SM. What are we on now? Way up there. SN, I think. Okay, well, what does this mean? These are service grades, which means additive packages. And additive packages means that these come with, we have to understand that engine oil is not just oil, the hydrocarbon. It's also got a significant additive package, which is going to have corrosion inhibitors and rust preventers and lubricity increasers and, cleaning detergents, stuff like that. In fact, that's what gets beat up if you leave your oil in your engine too long. And that's also when they recycle oil, what they do is they skim that out and then they put in a new additives package. And basically the oil, I mean, you can use the oil forever. You can always recycle oil. The question is whether it's, you know, economically appropriate, but you can always do it. These refer to additives packages, and you can always use a better additives package than what your car was designed to use. For instance, if your car was designed to use SF, you can use SN all day long and it'll actually be better. So don't you worry about that. There's another one, you know, CB, CD, that's for diesel motors. So look for the service label on your oil. Coronavirus. Yeah, they say the first sign of coronavirus is sneezing on Zoom session. All right, everybody cover your USB port. That was a joke. So that's my theory on engine oil. What else do I need to tell you? Here's what I need to tell you. Use a funnel.
Yeah.
Don't get oil all over the place because that's bad. What we want to do is we want to make sure after we've installed the oil and after we've installed the drain plug, we want to make sure to wipe everything down so that if there's a leak, we'll be able to know it. So we're going to wipe everything down. Some people might use a little squirted brake cleaner, but we're going to wipe everything down so that if there's a leak or any kind of issue like that, we're going to know about it. Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
So little player's tip for you. How are you going to know how much oil to put in it? Well, there is the specification, which is usually what I go by.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the problem with using the dipstick. Well, the dipstick looks like this. I can draw a fast dipstick. Here's the problem with using the dipstick. Dipstick looks like that, something like that. Now, this dipstick is going to have a little O-ring on the end of it, and it might have a little cap as well. You make sure that dipstick goes all the way down because it's part of the positive crankcase ventilation system. That's got to be sealed up there. You got to make sure you got a dipstick too. Anyways, down here, it's going to have marks that say this is how high the oil is supposed to be, whether it's hot or cold, usually cold, and then where you need to add a quart. And it's also going to tell you what viscosity oil you need to use. Might tell you what brand to use as far as that goes. But here's the problem with the dipstick. When we're doing an oil change, we're not going to sit there for 3 hours. What we're going to do is we're going to dump the oil into the engine using the recommended amount. Now, how do we know the recommended amount? Well, it could be in the owner's manual. Could hear it from the parts guy, which might be a bad way of doing it. Could be on the internet. Yeah, could be on ProDemand. All of these different places are going to show us, and you might find that one or two of them's got a different number. That's why we want to look for a consensus or who we think is the most reliable witness. Because the thing is, when you put oil into an engine, it's got to go through all these little passages in order to make it to the oil pan, which is where the dipstick goes into. So it may take a half hour for all the oil to drain down to where the dipstick will read it. As a result, if you run the engine hot, say for instance, if I was to drive to Glendora to Donut Man and come back here, my oil would probably show close to a quart low if I just pulled the dipstick the moment I stopped the engine, because it takes the oil up in the valve train. It's going to take the oil a while to get back into the well, I don't have an oil pan to speak of. I have a dry sump, but if I had a normal car, that's what would happen. So as a result, I mean, we used to do this all the time because I used to work at a gas station back when I was long, hippie-haired, golden locks. You know, people would come in and say, hey, can you check my oil? I'd say, yeah, okay, fine. So I pulled the dipstick and it would be a quart low. Well, it wouldn't really be low. What it would be is all the oil was still up in the upper part of the engine. So we're going to put in the recommended amount of oil, you know, 4.5 quarts, whatever. Don't be putting in 5. Don't be putting in 4. Put the right amount of oil. You can save the other oil for writing candidates' names on your neighbors' lawns, whatever. Kidding. And then he suggested that yeah, okay. So that's my theory about oil. Now, back when I was your age, we used to dig a hole in the backyard. This is how my father taught me. May he rest in peace. Dig a hole in the backyard and then take all that oil and dump it in the hole and cover it up. As a result, you can't drink the water from here. That was a joke. The point I was trying to make was, we can take the oil and get it in recycled. At least the stuff we do in class, we got a recycling service. But I don't want to take, 30 gallons a week from you from all the oil change you've been doing in your driveway. They have setups for that at all the regular stores that sell the oil, so be sure to utilize that, because I only get so much recycling service. Yeah. Okay, so there is good. Okay, there is automatic transmission. And automatic transmission is a hydraulically operated mechanism, which means it's going to use oil in order to move the shift valves, in order to create pressure. It's going to have a pump in it. It's going to have a torque converter. It's going to have all kinds of stuff where it uses automatic transmission fluid, which is a type of oil, a very high detergent type of oil. So almost nobody changes their automatic transmission fluid, which is number one, terrible in the first place, because you're supposed to change it, well, depending on the vehicle, let's say an average of every 50,000 miles. But along with that, you're also supposed to, in most transmissions at least, change the filter. Now, back in the day, they used to put a drain plug on the bottom of your automatic transmission pan. Transmission's right behind the engine. They used to put a drain plug on your automatic transmission pan to make it easy to change the fluid, but what they found out was that people weren't changing the filter, they were just changing the fluid. As a result, the filter gets clogged. Now, there's no bypass on this, so as the filter gets clogged, all you see is lower and lower pressure going through your automatic transmission, which is going to leave all the journals that the bearings are going into. It's the same situation you got in the engine. I mean, everything's supposed to be suspended by a thin film of oil, but at startup and when you don't have a clear filter, you're going to see very low oil pressure, and as a result, it's going to chew up your trans. So lots of people like to change their automatic transmission fluid at the shop because we've got a nice setup for it when you're not crawling underneath the car on your driveway, on your back in the driveway. So remember, automatic transmission is going to have usually also filter. So just be aware of that. Also, the thing is, you got to be very, very fastidious about changing this filter, because it's a much higher skill level than changing the oil filter. I mean, they're going to have like O-rings and square cut rings and all kinds of, cup rings, all kinds of weird seals that you got to make sure that you got your game on point when it comes to changing this filter. Usually, often, let me put it that way. So, you're only going to do this probably once every five years max, maybe every 10 years. Problem is, when you buy a 2000 vehicle, I can pretty much guarantee you it's never been done. If it's been done, you're lucky. So as a result, it needs doing. And if we look at our transmission fluid and it looks freaking dark brown, yeah, it's bad. That's burnt. Now look, new ATF automatic trans fluid is pinkish red, bright red, bright and clear. And folks, everything we said about leaving a bunch of oil in the engine is going to be true about leaving a bunch of, it's going to be 10 times as true about leaving a bunch of ATF in the transmission. So whenever you put the new fluid in, don't be surprised if you run it for a day or two and it starts looking weak, because the only way to get all the trans fluid out of the automatic transmission is to run a trans flush, which is appropriate. Where's my good friend Gerald Flores? Does it all the time. This was all tools that I was hoping to get this year, but you know, this freaking COVID thing has just wrecked everything. Maybe I will. I was gonna try to focus on air conditioning. Hey Chuck, you need to do air conditioning service? You're muted, man. You're muted. You need to do air conditioning service, Chuck?
Learn. I would love to learn.
Good. Yeah. Yeah, it's cool. It's cool. That was going to be my focus, at least for this year. Now, the only way to get out the old transmission fluid is to actually do a flush. Same with getting out your old coolant. That's why those are two services I'd kind of suggest doing professionally. However, to change the filter, you're going to have to drop the pan. When you drop the pan, it's going to dump oil like crazy, which is why I'm going to take out all the bolts except at the four corners, and then I'm going to slowly lower the pan down, and I'm going to dump it tilted like this so that as much of the fluid dumps out as possible. There's a million different configurations. Many of these transmissions you don't even drain the filter, but that's how you do it. And then you can drain the pan down. Now, when you take the pan down, do yourself a favor. When you take the pan down, don't just wipe it out. Show me the pan, because inside the pan is a wealth of diagnostic information about this transmission. And if you just wipe it out and throw the rag away, you're going to miss out on it. Because inside the pan, at least on modern vehicles, is usually a magnet. So there's going to be a ton of iron-related crap on that. Plus, there's going to be a bunch of clutch material on the bottom that we want to look at so that we can make some conclusions about this transmission. Well, we're not going to fix it. Why do we care? I'll tell you why we care. Because if you pull this thing, the pan down, and you see that the pan is filled with crap, you might start reconsidering whether you want to keep this vehicle, because automatic transmission replacement tends to be an extraordinarily expensive process. So you might want to reconsider, well, do I really want to keep this vehicle because I'm looking down the barrel of a $1,500 repair? Yeah, and maybe it's got 250,000 miles on it or something like that. Look, if you got a car that has 200,000 miles on it, why would you put in a brand new transmission for $1,500? People do crazy stuff with cars, which is why I want to have classes like this so that people can get smarter about making decisions about stuff like this. You know, like I told you before about, you know, how on the old C5 Corvettes, it's like if I needed a throttle body, I was going to get on eBay and get a used one. Well, the same thing goes for buying transmissions for cars that have 150, 200,000 miles on them. Unless there's a really good reason, I don't want to spend $1,500, $2,000 on a new transmission. Now, Chuck told me about this, 2003 Tahoe needs a transmission, and the problem is, you know, that transmission, it's like $1,800 just to rebuild it. Why? Because it's got all those solenoids in it, and most rebuilders will not rebuild it without changing out those solenoids. Why? Because if you have a solenoid failure, the customer is going to be very reluctant to pay for it. So you may find one of these places down here. I'm sure you can find one of these places down here that will just pull down the transmission, tear it apart, find the bad part, replace that part, and put it back together. They'd probably charge you for a full rebuild. I'll bet you they would. Clean the outside. Yeah. But that's doable that way. But you know, just pulling the trans out and putting the trans back in is a significant endeavor. In fact, on many cars, you got to pull down the whole cradle, the front wheel drive stuff. You got to pull down the whole cradle, which means you're pulling out the engine, which means you're disconnecting all the wires and the hoses and stuff. And that's major surgery, right?
Yeah.
So
They're doing that right now.
just things to think about, which is why we want to take classes like this, because they give us practical understanding so we can make better decisions. And for instance, if we have a CVT, what we need to do is get Chuck to put on a big boot, and then we bend over and have him cock back and kick us in the ass because we didn't get rid of it while it still ran good. And I'll not talk about which manufacturer makes the CVT transmissions, because after all, we're getting paid for by tax dollars, but you can look and find out yourself. All right, new ATF is pinkish red, bright and clear. So if you start seeing dark stuff, watch out, watch out. Now, it might, you know, it might be, well, let me just put it this way. If it's dirty or old or burnt looking, you want to change that stuff because it's probably lost all its lubricity. And we got to ask ourselves what our goals are for these vehicles. Do we want them to run another 5 years? Do we really want to invest on them like we're going to, you know, own them for 30? Because we probably aren't. You know, so I'm thinking, you know, we got a 5-year window where we want to make sure this thing lasts 5 years. So we want to properly maintain it without going broke. Yes, Mr. Reyna.
A lot of these transmissions aren't coming with drain plugs or dipsticks anymore.
Right. Mm-hmm.
It makes it kind of tricky to change the
Yeah.
fluid.
Yeah. And you know, so there's a lot of transmissions that you don't do a fluid service at all, and there's a lot of transmissions that don't have filters. One of the big problems many of our students have is that they have no dipstick. So as a result, what you have to do is keep adding oil. You unscrew a little screw, you run the engine, and you keep adding trans fluid until it finally comes down the little hole. For instance, on the C5 Corvettes, there's no dipstick. So what you have to do is you have to run the transmission. You have to get it up to like 170 degrees Fahrenheit. Then you have to pull out the little plug on the side. And then while it's running, you have to keep pumping ATF into it until it finally comes over the top. And that, you know, that tells you where your fluid level is. It's kind of involved, and it's sure as hell not the kind of job that you want to do on your back in the driveway. So you might be able to buy that silver Corvette pretty cheap because that dude can't keep it on the road. I should call him, maybe. I should call, God, I should call so many people. Anyway, my point was that automatic transmission fluid, what have you heard so far in this class? Because this is what, the 10th week. We should really start thinking about, you know, what have we done, what have we heard, what have we covered, and where do we want to go? And what you hear is, you know, brake fluid never gets changed. Let's change it. Automatic transmission fluid never gets changed. Let's change it. Oil often gets changed, but let's kick it up to synthetic. Yeah. I believe I told you, I'm convinced I told you that coolant never gets changed, and we need to change that because it turns acidic and it eats everything, especially aluminum parts, which most modern engines are, and head gaskets, which every car has. So what are you hearing? What you hear is that fluids are an extraordinarily commonly neglected aspect of modern motor vehicles. And we haven't even talked about power steering fluid. Chuck, how do you feel about that?
I change mine every couple of years.
Oh, good. Then you won't mind changing mine. How do you change it though, sir?
Depends. Sometimes I use the little, you know, those draw it up. But most of the time I'll
Turkey
just,
bakers.
yeah, most of the time I'll just the little high pressure line that's pumping out, I'll put it into a pan or a bottle, and then I'll just start it up and I'll just pour fluid on the top and watch the fluid come out from the bottom till it's nice and clear. And then I'll shut it off and button everything back up again.
You're not scared of running it dry that way?
Well, you keep an eye on it. You're pretty diligent, you know what I mean? You know.
Because doesn't the high pressure line bust out insane amounts?
Yeah, it comes out pretty fast, or I'll just run it. I'll drain it, fill it, run it, drain it, fill it. You know what I mean? You know.
Are you turning the front wheels lock to lock during all of this, or?
Yeah, I do that, you know. But
Yeah.
it doesn't take a lot of fluid on the Toyota pickup. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. I'm just thinking in terms of rack and pinion, that to empty out the ram would take, you know, you'd have to run lock to lock at least once.
Yeah.
So again, if we have fluid flush equipment, which we don't right now, but if we had fluid flush equipment, that would be really the class way to do it. Because, for instance, like the cooling system, if we're trying to change the fluid in the cooling system, what most people do is they just open up that little drain cock on the bottom of the radiator. Well, that's going to empty the radiator, but it's going to leave all the old acidic coolant inside the engine, which is just going to mix with whatever new stuff you put in it. So the class way is to actually do a flush where everything's getting filtered as it goes through, like, you know, basically like a dialysis machine. Yes. Yes, if you don't vote for Prop 23, I'm going to have to use the trans flush machine. That's a weird joke. Anyways, the point I was trying to make was I hold no political positions. Except I always vote against every tax increase. Yeah, I've gotten older. All right, so we talked about changing brake fluid. We talked about changing trans fluid. We talked about changing power steering fluid. We've talked about changing engine coolant. And really, you know, like I said, I think what we want to do is we want to focus on making this vehicle last another 5 years, because, you know, we don't know if something's going to get run into. And most of the used vehicles, you know, I mean, if the car has 20,000 miles, well, yeah, we could probably look forward to using it for 10. But something tells me probably within 5 years, we're going to find some feature on modern cars that we can't do without. Like, for instance, on my 2008 Corvette, it's got top of the line stereo for 2008. I mean, the navigation system is still on CDs, which is kind of whack. Anyways, you know, I go inside the 2020 Nissan Versa, and it's bitching. It's got all the setup. You can set it up with your phone, and it's like, man, I wish my car had this. You know.
Yeah.
So, cars are much more disposable, I guess, than they used to be. But you know, we spend a lot more money than we used to. But the fluid change is an excellent, excellent way to get started in terms of not only taking better care of your car, but also increasing your mastery of the car. Because what it's going to do is it's going to familiarize yourself with the parts and their relationship and their location and stuff like that. And as a result, what we're going to do is we're going to become more comfortable around the car, just like, you know, how you become more comfortable around a dog. You know, you stick out your hand like this, and then maybe you pet it for a minute, and then maybe next time you pet it for 2 minutes, and then next time you pet it for 3 minutes, and pretty soon you become comfortable around this thing. And that's what we want to do with cars, so that when the car breaks down, we just don't start freaking out and crying and making stupid decisions based on the fact that we're basically panicking. Well, while we're on the subject of maintenance, let's do this. We talked about oil filters. Let's talk about air filters, because this is a big deal. Two basic types of air filters. There's one for the engine, and often there's one for the cabin. Now, here's the thing about the cabin air filter. Hardly ever gets changed, but it should. And as a result, what happens is you start, you know, passing around a bunch of, you know, allergens and pollens and stuff like that. Many cars don't have a cabin air filter, but if they do have a cabin air filter, you should go ahead and spend the $10 and change out your cabin air filter, because what it does is it's going to filter all the air that's circulated throughout your system. And since most people are on a recirculating system anyway, you know, it's just recirculating the air that's inside your vehicle, which means if something bad's there, it's just going to be continuously blowing crap in your face. In fact, oh, I was going to tell you what was on an ASE question, but it had to do with a cabin air filter. But that would be a gross violation. So the new ASEs are freaking weird. They're pretty hardcore compared to what they used to be. They're pretty hardcore. I was kind of taken aback by them, but you know, technology keeps marching on. All right, so cabin filters, do yourself a favor. If your car has a cabin filter, change it. As far as engine filters go, here's the important thing. You take good care of that filter box, because the number one thing we see is filter boxes that are missing straps, or they're cracked, or they're broken, or they're missing screws. And that's a freaking disaster, because what happens is if this engine air filter is not held tightly in the air filter box, air filter housing, whatever you want to call it, then what's going to happen is the seal is not going to be compressed. As a result, you're just going to get a bunch of unfiltered air going in your engine, and that's bad. I don't know about you, but I let dogs in the house, and as soon as I get the house clean, and then 4 days later, I can see, oh, I've had dogs in this house, right? Because there's like this level of dust or dirtiness. Well, you can imagine what it's like driving your car down the freeway. So you don't want to run a bunch of dirty air into your engine. And one of the problems is not only is it going to cause accelerated engine wear, but it also leads gunk and mud all over the inside of your engine, which is bad too. So we want to make sure that our air filter game is on point, which means we got to make sure the air filter box and air filter housing is in good shape. And that's rough because often you're going to inherit it and it's not going to be in good shape. So if it's in good shape, keep it that way. Be careful about who you let that touch that, because most of these air filter housings are going to be made of plastic. And that means that if you treat them roughly, or if you lever on them wrong, as they get old, they get very brittle. And that's how things get broken, things get cracked, and they tend to be pretty expensive to repair or replace. And people look at it and they're like, I don't want to spend $100 replacing this thing. I'm just going to let it go. Okay, well, that's what I said about my diabetes too. That was a joke. Not really. The point I was trying to make was, so air filters, both of them. We talked about all the oil filters. Okay.
May I mention something, Mr. Rookcliffe?
Yes, sir. Of course.
My maintenance on the air filter is I take care of it because I don't want to change the MAF sensor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And he just tears those things up, man.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, there are some people that will say that you can take an air filter and you can blow air the opposite direction to clean it out. Or maybe you can slam it on a table to get the dirt out, or blah, blah, blah. Really? Are you letting $15 make your decisions for you again? I sound like I'm not sensitive to people that don't make a lot of money.
That's not true, because those things are cheap, but your engines are expensive.
Yeah. Nothing's as expensive as a vehicle that's unreliable, because that's what gets you to work. And there are many jobs, most jobs, especially in a difficult economy, if you're late to work 3 times, you don't have to worry about being late anymore, right? So the focus for me is always a reliable vehicle, and I try to teach this to the freaking 16-year-old students, and they're like, no, I want something fast, except it has to be like an '84 Honda Civic, and it has to be fast. I'm like, that's like two opposite things. My point was that, yeah, I'm all about reliable vehicle. I mean, can you imagine if one of these high school students graduated and had a reliable vehicle for the next 5 years? That could get them through a union apprenticeship. That could get them through a community college. That could get them through a university program. But they want to focus on the other stuff, and it just breaks my heart, because, cars are make or break your, a good car can make your life great. A bad car can make your life suck. Make it unmanageable, right? So, where do we go? Well, let's talk about this little thing right here. We call that the battery. And it might have these little rascals right on it. And it's going to have a big plus right there, and it's going to have a minus right there. That's your battery. Now your battery is going to be furnished with hold down clamps that hold it tightly to the vehicle so that it doesn't bounce around, and certainly so it doesn't tip over. If those are missing, I strongly suggest that you procure them. I would check eBay first. I mean, I see people go to the junkyard all the time, and it's like, damn, dude, you could have just gone to eBay and stayed at home in your pajamas. But some people like going to the junkyard, so.
I like it.
I haven't done that in a long time. Here's the battery. Now, how long do batteries last?
5 years.
5 to 7 years. Yep. And the weird part is they would actually last a lot longer if they made them different, but then they wouldn't sell as many batteries. Yeah, okay. So here's the thing about batteries. The battery is the power source for the whole electrical system in the car. Battery is super important. The battery must be reliable. The battery must be adequately maintained so that it maintains its reliability. And that's an issue because the battery is filled with chemicals, and not only is it filled with chemicals, but it's filled with significant acids like battery acid. Yeah. Which is a strong acid as part of the electrolyte. Now, here's what happens with batteries. They last about 5-7 years. Please get the right size batteries. Now, batteries are really expensive in California now because we got to deal with the disposal of all the lead inside them and the acid. Batteries are really expensive now. That's why I would get a good one. I wouldn't get a cheap one unless I was going to sell the car, and I sure as hell would not get a used one, because used ones is what you get right before you sell a car. You can't really warranty them, and they have weird problems that you want to be part of. You know, and you don't want your battery, you don't want your bad battery wiping out your alternator and your starter, which is what a bad battery will do. So don't do that. So how do we maintain the battery? Well, first of all, we make sure we get the right size. Second of all, we make sure that it's held down correctly. Then what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that the top is clean. How are we going to make sure the top is clean? Don't ever use baking soda on the top of a battery. Just don't.
Why did they tell you to do that?
Because they want to sell you more batteries. See,
okay.
the thing is, there's vents on the top of the battery because as it gets hot, everything is going to expand, right? So there's vents on the top of the battery. Well, due to capillary action, what's going to happen is if you use water with baking soda on top of the battery, that baking soda is going to go whee, and then it gets inside the battery where it neutralizes the battery acid and basically kills your battery.
That makes sense.
Don't use baking soda. Use water. Water from a hose, probably. Don't do this inside the shop, please. We had that happen a couple of years ago. Use water. Use water and paper towels, and I'll tell you why. Lots of water and lots of paper towels. The reason we want to use paper towels, not rags, is because if we use rags, what we're going to do is we're going to wipe off the top of the battery with rags, and then we're going to put rags on the table. And then the rags are going to dry out, and then people are going to use those rags, and they're going to leave them on the fender, even though they're coated with acid, but nobody knows because it's dry now. That's bad. So what we're going to do is we're going to use paper towels. Just like wiping down the rotors with brake cleaner, we're going to use paper towels. We're going to use paper towels here. We got lots of paper towels, folks. Don't be shy. We're going to use paper towels here because as soon as we get done with the paper towels, we're going to throw them away. And that's going to keep the battery acid off the fender, which, you know, battery acid will eat paint faster than brake fluid will, which is bad enough. So we're going to use paper towels, and what are we going to do? We're going to wipe off the dirty crap off the top of the battery. Why? Because it's electrically conductive. And you can get yourself in a situation where the electrolyte so much covers the top of the battery that it actually conducts electricity, and you find yourself with a dead battery. In fact, you can put a voltmeter. When this happens, you can put a voltmeter here and on the top of the battery, and you'll get like 6 volts. That's not supposed to happen, right? The top of the battery is not supposed to be a conductor, but if it's got enough crap on the top of it, it will be. So we want to keep the top of the battery clean, and we would like to keep these terminals clean. If they start getting corroded, get out your hose, not on full blast because you want to be blowing acid all over the place, but get out your hose, start cleaning off this corrosion. Now, what many people are going to do is they're going to put Vaseline or something like that. Basically, they're going to try to keep the oxygen away from this connection because, after all, that's going to cause corrosion. But it's not the worst idea I've ever heard of to take the connectors off every once in a while and clean them up. Problem is, on many cars, if you disconnect the battery, the radio goes into I'm being stolen mode. And if you don't have the code, you're going to have to take this thing to a dealer to get it reinstated. You get the radio working again. So here's what they use. Well, timing's pretty good. Here's what they use. They have this thing called the battery saver. Goes like this, then it goes around like that. Goes like this. Not the worst drawing in the world. And then it's got this little like kinky thing right there. And then it comes like this to a nine-volt battery. And you stick this thing in the cigarette lighter.
Mhm.
Folks, always follow manufacturer's instructions on this, just in case there's some kinky part about, many cars have many of these ports. I'm not sure that all of them are going to preserve your settings. Also, let's use a fresh 9-volt battery. But what you do is you stick this into the cigarette lighter, and what it's going to do is it's going to maintain the presets on your radio. It's going to keep your radio from going into I'm being stolen mode. And it's also going to keep your PCM settings in case it's done a lot of adaptive learning. But again, check with your manufacturer specifications, make sure this is going to work. Now, if you have a fuse blown in your cigarette lighter circuit, or if your cigarette lighter is disconnected, that's not going to work. But we need to get in the habit of using these things when we change batteries, because if you don't, number one, in many cars, it's going to block out the radio. In other cars, you can upset a whole bunch of other stuff that you don't want to mess with. So it's just easier to do it this way.
How much are those things?
Yeah, I don't know, $10 probably.
That's not bad.
Yeah, cheap. But now, Chuck, the more I think about it, if this is a 9-volt battery and you still have the 12-volt battery connected, that 12-volt battery is going to be trying to charge this 9-volt battery. Something tells me it's going to get pretty hot pretty quick, which means you probably better not do this too much. Now, I have a friend, a guy that I used to work with, who was a good mechanic, and he used to change batteries with the engine running all the time. I mean, this was stuff that we were told is absolutely the worst thing you could do. But what he would do instead of using this is he would start the engine, he would run the engine, and while he was running the engine, he would disconnect the battery and put a new one in there. And I was always terrified watching this, but he'd been a very successful professional mechanic for a long time, and he said he'd never had a problem with it. And I was just like looking at it like, because remember back in the old days, what lame rednecks and other ne'er-do-wells used to do to test to see if the alternator was working is they used to disconnect the battery while the engine was running, and if the alternator was working, the engine would stay running. If the alternator wasn't working, it would just die, right? For the want of a $5 voltometer and a lesson from Rockcliffe. Horrifying. So that used to be bad because it used to make the alternator go full blast, and then it would like destroy the alternator. So that's a battery saver. I'm still nervous about that method, but it's worked for him for many years. I'd love to have a ruling on that, but maybe next time I talk to my guys at Citrus, I'll set them up for a little powwow and see how they feel about that. But we got to do something, folks. Don't just disconnect the battery willy-nilly and unaware of the potential hazards. Now, you know that there is a battery cleaner. Looks like this. I think. Yeah, pretty much.
Mhm.
Something like that. Battery, post, cleaner. Basically, it's got a wire brush that you put on the inside of the connector, and also a wire brush that you put around the post.
Mhm.
That's if you have top posts. But, you know, this is old technology. It works pretty well. Works relatively well. In fact, let me just tell you, for those, you know, veteranos around, here's a diagnostic tip. Look, one of the things we do when we're testing starting systems and batteries, one of the things we do is we turn on the headlights and we crank the engine. What should happen is the lights should dim, and then when the engine starts and you take the starter off, the light should go back up. That's because the voltage goes down to like 10, and then it comes back up to 13. One of the diagnostic, old school diagnostic tests is if you try to crank the engine and the lights go out, that means that your connections are bad. You got to come in and clean your connections. Yeah. Just a little player's tip for you. Because it means, you know, it means there's too much resistance in that connection and it's all going to the starter motor. So, in case you're wondering why you have a slow crank or something like that, just a little diagnostic stuff. For me, if the terminals look bad, I'm going to clean them just because all kinds of weird stuff can happen. So you never know. You never know. That I've pulled those apart and seen incredible amounts of corrosion that I never would imagine would be possible between the clamp and the post. So as for me, I'm gonna set them up right. I'm gonna wheel that wire because usually the post has been changed. You know, they start putting on this thing right. Geez, I wish my drawing didn't suck now. So they start putting on aftermarket ends to the because they over tighten the sheet metal. Doggone it! I'm trying to make this drawing. I'm trying to hurry and it's making it suck. So yeah, that's okay. All right. So what we're doing is they're putting on these aftermarket ends because most of your top post vehicles, most of your vehicles today that use top post batteries, they have sheet metal clamps on the posts, on the wires. And what happens is people tighten the living crap out of those. You're not supposed to tighten the living crap out of those. You're supposed to clean them, and then you're supposed to tighten them until the clamp won't turn, and then just a little bit more just to make sure you're not tripping. But what you're not supposed to do is keep tightening them, keep tightening them, keep tightening them, because what happens is you end up stretching out the sheet metal, and pretty soon they're not tight anymore. Then you start putting this end on, and the reliability of this end is a million times worse. Because you know all the wires that you stuck in this little clamp here are now exposed to the elements, which means they're going to oxidize, and that's when you see huge corrosion. Like I used to have an F250 that, you know, I'd have to come in pretty much every year and rebuild this clamp because everything would get so corroded that it would cause huge resistance in that circuit. So 3 minutes. You got that? Side post. Here's what you got to watch out for on side post batteries. Number one, the bolts that stick out are very, very short. In fact, they're pretty much the perfect size. Side post looks like this. Now, it's got the little 8mm or 5/16 head to it, and most people are going to use the wrong tool on this, which is why it's going to get stripped. You can get replacements for those, folks. I would strongly suggest it. Or what they want to do is they want to add aftermarket stereo, which is going to increase the thickness of this pack, which means this bolt now is only going to get 2 or 3 threads, which means when you over tighten it, it's going to pull the thread straight out. Now you're screwed. Now, actually, the interesting thing about that, I don't know if you've ever seen this, Chuck, but the way the battery rebuilders do this is they have the battery there and they get out a torch and they fill that hole with lead and retap it and stick the screw back in, but they're using a torch on a freaking battery that's filled with sulfuric acid and lead, and they're using a torch on it, and you know, they're cool with it. Terrifying. But anyway, my point was, try not to strip those threads, folks. How are you going to do that? Because remember, what you're going to do when it comes to battery connections is you want to get this tight, but tight enough, but not too tight, because you're going into lead, which is an extraordinarily soft material. So if you keep turning, I swear to God, if you keep tightening this, eventually it's going to just keep on turning. You'll pull the threads right out of it. So side post, not my favorite. What I'm going to suggest to you is one of my favorite tools, which is going to go in a drill motor like this.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe it's got a battery. Incidentally, I've got a set of Kawasaki, a drill motor and a flashlight. I don't have the charger for it, but if someone wants it. This is a wire wheel. You can get, you know, a set of 6 wire wheels for about $4 down at Harbor Freight. And you put it on a drill motor and you spin it. And what you do is you end up cleaning up the contact surfaces of the side post. You end up cleaning up the contact surfaces of everything, because we want our electrical connections to be in good shape. Hard to preserve. Now, after we've cleaned up all the electrical connections, if you wanted, you could put Vaseline over something like that over the top. So they make that spray stuff too. And all it's there to do is to keep the oxygen away, because the oxygen is going to oxidize everything. It's going to turn all your copper from bright light orange to dark brown, which the oxidation is going to create a resistance, and that's going to mess up your electrical circuits. So bring it in, let's look at it, see what you got, see where you are.
So any word about when we get to go to the shop? They still don't know yet, huh?
Okay, I heard a rumor today that it wasn't going to be this semester, but I'm holding out hope that's not true. And I'm kind of not believing it, but we'll see, right? I mean, it depends who wins the election. That was a joke. No, really, I don't think.
It
Yeah,
does, huh?
yeah, it kind of does. So
What my daughter attends Cal State up in Monterey Bay, but she said she was already told that they're still going to do distance learning for next semester.
The whole year, yeah.
She was already told. So I don't know.
Well, we'll cross our fingers.
Yep.
All Gavin Newsom.
Yep.
our forefathers would have been shooting by now.
Yeah, I know it.
Yeah, probably.
Well, I mean, when you quarantine is where you lock up sick people. Tyranny is when you lock up healthy people. Anyways, is that recording still on? That was a joke. That was a joke. That's what crazy people say. God, I hope not. This is child. What are you teaching a 6-year-old child? I got a friend whose kid's in kindergarten. What are you teaching a 6-year-old child? Can you imagine to wear a mask all day? I mean, our fathers stormed the beaches at Normandy, and we're worried about something that has a 99.98 survival rate. That's all I'm going to say about that. That's what crazy people say and think. As for me, I have complete faith in our. I talked to I'm not going to tell that story. I talked to someone who was a hippie, and he was like, "Oh, I think the government officials have this well in hand." I'm like, okay, good. Well, that's going to help you sleep better at night. Anyway, folks, I sure appreciate it. What are we doing next week? Thank you. Do you know what you're doing next week, or
How about electrical?
You want me to spin the wheel? You still want the electrical? I know. I want to do the electrical too. In fact, what I should do now that I'm regaining my health and whatnot, what I should do is I should teach a Tuesday class, which would be advanced, all the veteranos, so that the two wouldn't clash. But then all the veteranos would be out of the Nuevecito class, and then who would save them when they get led astray? I don't know. We'll see. I mean, we'll see how much money there is next year, and we'll also see how you feel. What can you do?
All right, I'll fill out that survey.
Yeah, please, folks, fill out that survey. Get me a raise.
Okay.
I'll see you next week. Have a great week, folks. Thanks.
Bye-bye. See you next week.
Thanks.
Thank you
Good
so
night.
much.
You. Good night.
Night. I never know how to get off of this thing.
I'll help you.